Okay, how in the world can one book have a single, coherent message when it was written by 40 different people over a span of 1,500 years? I mean, seriously, how is that even possible? Well, that's the huge puzzle we're digging into today. We're going to unpack a pretty fascinating argument that uses the sheer impossibility of the Bible's creation to make a really powerful claim about where it came from. So let's get right into it. All right, so the whole argument kicks off with a simple fact that pretty much everyone agrees on. The Bible was written by human beings. And for a lot of people, that right there raises some big questions about its authority. I mean, it makes sense, right? We're human, we're flawed, we've got our own biases, and we're definitely products of the time and place we live in. And that leads us straight to the core problem. You've got dozens of different authors writing across these huge stretches of time. How could all of that work possibly come together to form one single coherent message? It just seems impossible, doesn't it? Well, the source we're looking at today actually builds its entire case on that very idea. It leans right into that impossibility. To really get what this argument is saying, you first have to wrap your head around the sheer scale of the challenge here. I mean, forget about a unified message for a second and just think about the logistics, the coordination. The source material really hammers this point home. This wasn't just a difficult project. By any human standard, it was basically an impossible one. First up, just consider the number of authors. The source we're examining says there were 40 of them. Not some small, focused committee, but 40 completely separate individuals, each with their own voice, their own ideas. And who were these people? Well, the source breaks it down: 39 Jewish authors and one non-Jewish author. And they came from all walks of life. You've got shepherds, kings, fishermen, prophets, doctors. I mean, talk about diverse. Each one had their own unique perspective and life experience. Now, this is where it starts to get truly mind-boggling. These 40 authors wrote their parts over a period of 1,500 years. That's 15 centuries. Think about that. It means that almost none of these authors ever met each other, they couldn't have read each other's work, and they certainly couldn't have called a meeting to collaborate on a shared vision. This timeline really puts it all into perspective. The first books get started way back around 1400 BCE. The Old Testament is finished up around 400 BCE, but then the final books of the New Testament aren't done until around 100 CE. The person who wrote Genesis and the person who wrote Revelation are separated by a gulf of time that is just immense. And it wasn't just a time gap. Nope. These authors were also spread out over huge distances. They were writing from 3 different continents: Asia, Africa, and Europe. Each one was living in a completely different culture under totally different political systems. And as if that weren't enough, they weren't even writing in the same language. The original texts were written in 3 different languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, each with its own unique grammar and style. So the chance for any kind of direct collaboration was, well, it was zero. So let's just pause for a second and recap the sheer scale of this thing. You've got 40 different authors from all kinds of backgrounds, writing over 1,500 years, from 3 different continents, in 3 different languages. I mean, by any human logic, the book that results from that should be an absolute mess, a chaotic, contradictory jumble of texts. And yet, this is where the argument takes a dramatic turn. Because despite all those factors that should have led to complete chaos, the source we're looking at claims the exact opposite happened. It points to something totally surprising. Here it is. This is the core claim from the source, that across all 66 of these books, from the very first page of Genesis to the last page of Revelation, there is a profound unity of thought, a single, developing story that stays perfectly consistent despite all those incredible barriers. And just so we're clear, this idea of unity isn't just about avoiding obvious contradictions. The argument here is way bigger. It's that there's one single grand narrative flowing through the whole thing, where later books seem to intentionally build on the ideas of earlier ones, almost as if they were all part of one single pre-planned story. So, the big question is, if this incredible unity is real, how on earth do you explain it? Well, this is where the source presents its conclusion, and it's not just presented as one possibility among many, but as the only logical answer. To make this point, the source uses a really powerful analogy. It asks us to compare 2 different scenarios. First, imagine just trying to get 20 people all in the same room for one day to come to a total complete agreement on one single complex topic. As the source points out, this is nearly impossible. I mean, just think about any work meeting you've been in, or even just trying to get your friends to agree on where to go for dinner. Getting total unified agreement on anything is incredibly hard. And this chart illustrates the logic perfectly. If getting agreement in that first simple scenario is already highly difficult, what happens when you scale it up to the Bible's scenario? 40 people, 1,500 years, 3 continents. The difficulty doesn't just go up a little bit, it becomes astronomically, impossibly high. And that brings us right to the argument's final conclusion. The source basically says, look, human beings on their own could never, ever have produced this result. The only way to explain this level of deep, century-spanning unity is if there weren't really 40 authors working on their own, but one single guiding author working through all of them. In other words, divine inspiration. So there you have it. You've got the impossible challenge of coordination, the surprising unity of the final text, and the conclusion that all of this points directly to divine inspiration. It's a really compelling argument from our source. But of course, it does leave us with one final big question. Even if we accept this idea of a unity of thought, what other explanations might account for it? Now that is a question we're thinking about. Thanks for joining me.